Good morning. It's Friday, September 10th, and tomorrow is an important day of remembrance, the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks we now refer to simply as 9/11. Today's top story is a full World Watch show about that event. Now, this is Top Story.
On the morning of September 11th, I lived in this building right here.
Saturday is the 20th anniversary of something that happened not long before your life began, but has touched your life more than almost anything that has happened during your life. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 4 commercial planes took off from East Coast airports, all bound for California and full of fuel. Just minutes into the flights, hijackers took over the cockpits and turned the planes into missiles. They crashed the first plane into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Immediately after the crash, many thought it was just a horrible pilot error.
How did that pilot not see the building? How did he miss? He didn't miss.
17 minutes later, a second plane crashed into the South Tower. People realized these were not accidents. The United States was under attack. The Pentagon was the next target, and a fourth plane's target may have been the Capitol building or the White House. We'll never know, because that jet crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. That after a courageous group of passengers fought those hijackers. The damage at all 3 buildings worsened as the jet fuel fed flames. Firefighters and first responders walked into the buildings knowing they might not make it out.
The building disappeared in a cloud of smoke. It was just gone. It collapsed so fast.
The streets of New York were filled with people running through the smoke and dust. Nearly 3,000 people died in the 9/11 attacks, including those in the planes and buildings, as well as police officers, firefighters, and paramedics. Remembering and honoring the scars left on American soil from the attacks on September 11th began almost immediately after that day 20 years ago. Memorials engraved with the names of every life lost stand today. As early as 2002, the first designs were made for the One World Trade Center building at the base of where the Twin Towers collapsed, finishing at 1,776 feet in 2012. The monument literally stands for American independence as the nation's tallest building. Also in 2002, the National Park Service passed a bill for a permanent memorial in Stoystown, Pennsylvania, for the 44 passengers of United Flight 93 who lost their lives. That year, the Pentagon was also reconstructed and reopened with an official dedication by President Bush of a memorial near Arlington, Virginia, 6 years later. You'll find memorials to 9/11 in some unusual places. Flight 93 was the only hijacked plane that didn't hit its target. Huddling together, a group of passengers decided to go down fighting. "Let's roll," one said as they attacked the hijackers. Their efforts kept the plane from reaching its target as it crashed into a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. 13 years later, the U.S. Navy commissioned a ship built to honor the lives lost on Flight 93. Gordon Felt's brother Ed was one among 40 passengers and crew who died on that plane.
Here we are 20 years later, and it's still very emotional, and it still hurts. And I suspect it will for the rest of our lives.
The Somerset's bow and keel are forged from steel, salvaged from the crash site, one of many 9/11 relics on board the Navy vessel. This ship is one of 3 named in remembrance of 9/11. The other 2 are the USS Arlington and the USS New York. But remembering the attacks of September 11th goes beyond monuments and ships. Individuals and communities have planned personal, creative, and unofficial ways to honor the day, like this trio, a veteran, a widow of a 9/11 firefighter, and a teenager who is the brother of an active duty serviceman. walking from Boston to New York City to commemorate those lost. Or this swim in the Hudson River, where 200 men and women, most of them current or former Navy SEALs, swam in honor of the somber 20th anniversary.
It's important that we remember the losses that many families and many people experienced. It's also important that we honor those who responded to the tragedy, who responded their nation's call to service, and especially those who did not make it home.
Their goal? That no one be forgotten. To understand what led to 9/11, we could take you back to the days of Muhammad and the founding of Islam, or the Crusades and the battle over Jerusalem in the Middle Ages. But Hannah Harris says maybe we can jump forward to a few decades before the attacks.
We'd have to go back to the 1900s and the end of the Second World War, but let's jump forward to modern times. The September 11th attacks were orchestrated by Osama Bin Laden. He was the leader of a militant Islamic group called Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden held a great deal of resentment against the United States' foreign policies in the Middle East. He and his associates believed the Jewish people were taking over the homeland of Palestinian Arabs, so he disliked the close ties between the US and Israel. Bin Laden also resented that US troops were sent to Saudi Arabia after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. So the US became Bin Laden's enemy. And it became Bin Laden's mission to force the US out of the Middle East. Bin Laden believed the US was a weak target. He thought it could only withstand a few strikes before it would withdraw. In the 1980s, US troops pulled out of Lebanon after terrorists bombed a Marine base there, killing 241 Americans. And then in the early 90s, the US pulled troops out of Somalia after an attack that killed 18 servicemen. Bin Laden thought another attack killing thousands of Americans would be the end of US involvement in the Middle East. But he failed to anticipate the US's strong determination to defend its people in the wake of the 9/11 attacks.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
At the top of the show, we said your life has been affected by something that happened not long before you were born. Caleb Bailey was pretty young in 2001, but Caleb, you've come up with some ways 9/11 changed our everyday lives, right?
Start with travel, Brian. Before 2001, we didn't have the layers and layers of security we now take for granted. Take off your shoes and belt. Go through the X-ray booth. Sorry, you can't accompany your uncle to the gate. The TSA was created in response to the 9/11 attacks, and it's now 60,000 strong with a nearly $8 billion budget. Before 2001, only 5% of bags were examined at airports. After, new laws required all bags to be screened, cockpit doors reinforced, and more undercover federal marshals aboard flights. And your identity is checked too, to be sure your name isn't on a no-fly list of potential terrorists. The FBI, law enforcement, and other agencies have always kept track of suspected criminals, but after 9/11, the government began collecting an unprecedented amount of information about ordinary Americans. Laws like the USA Patriot Act made national security a priority, but at the expense of personal liberty and privacy. You should assume that nothing you do online or on your phone is truly private. And did you know that your life has not known a year without the US at war? The war in Afghanistan and other military actions since 2001 have been part of what President George W. Bush described as America's war on terror. 9/11 has changed the way we look at other people. Those terrorists were driven by radical Islam, and their attack on Western and Christian culture has led to an enduring suspicion of Muslims. We're more cautious now. Because the terrorists attacked where they could kill the most people, we've become more wary about large events and crowds. Since 2001, an enormous amount is spent on securing the nation against terrorism, and that comes from taxpayers. Now, not all the changes have been sad. 9/11 brought a wave of unity and patriotism. People volunteered for military service and for charitable causes. There were more displays of national pride and prayers at public events. And finally, we all have a much greater respect for firefighters and emergency workers. And that's because of the actions of those who came to the rescue after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
Make sure to check out the full site at worldwatch.news. You can try out the show free for a month. And remember, whatever the news, the purpose of the Lord will stand.